In the midst of World War II, General George S. Patton made a bold statement. He called the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised. This was not mere hyperbole from a flamboyant general. The M1 Garand had revolutionized infantry combat. It gave American soldiers a decisive advantage over their enemies. While German, Japanese, and Italian soldiers worked bolt-action rifles, American GIs fired as fast as they could pull the trigger. This is the story of America's first semi-automatic service rifle, the weapon that changed warfare and saved countless American lives. To understand the M1 Garand, we must go back to World War I. American soldiers in the trenches carried the Springfield 1903 rifle. It was an excellent weapon, accurate and reliable, but it was a bolt-action rifle, requiring manual operation between each shot. A skilled soldier could fire perhaps 15 rounds per minute. This rate of fire had been standard for decades. Every major army used similar bolt-action rifles, but some military thinkers believed there was a better way. If a rifle could load itself automatically, soldiers could fire much faster. The technology for self-loading rifles existed. Several experimental designs had been developed, but these were complex, heavy, and often unreliable. Military leaders were skeptical that semi-automatic rifles were practical. One man who believed otherwise was John Cantius Garand. Garand was born in Quebec, Canada, in 1888. His family moved to Connecticut when he was 11 years old. Young Garand showed an aptitude for mechanical work. He worked in textile mills and machine shops, learning metalworking and tool design. During World War I, Garand worked for the Bureau of Standards. He designed gauges for measuring artillery shells. This experience taught him precision manufacturing techniques. After the war, Garand became fascinated with firearms design. He began experimenting with semi-automatic rifle mechanisms. In 1919, he submitted a design to the U.S. Army for evaluation. The Army was impressed enough to hire him. Garand went to work at Springfield Armory in Massachusetts. Springfield Armory was America's primary weapons development facility. Here, Garand would spend the next 16 years perfecting his rifle design. The Army gave Garand a challenging mission: design a semi-automatic rifle that was as reliable as a bolt action. It had to work in mud, sand, rain, and extreme temperatures. It had to be simple enough for mass production. And it had to be affordable enough to equip millions of soldiers. These requirements seemed almost impossible to meet. Garand experimented with various operating systems. His first designs used the primer setback principle. When a cartridge fired, the primer would push back slightly. This movement could trip a mechanism to cycle the action, but this system proved unreliable with military ammunition. Garand switched to a gas-operated system. When a rifle fires, expanding gases propel the bullet down the barrel. A small amount of gas could be tapped off through a port in the barrel. This gas would drive a piston that cycled the action. The action would eject the spent cartridge and load a fresh round. This happened automatically, faster than the eye could follow. All the shooter had to do was pull the trigger again. Gas operation proved more reliable than primer setback, but Garand still faced numerous challenges. The rifle had to handle the powerful .30-06 cartridge. This round generated tremendous pressure and recoil. The gas system had to be carefully calibrated. Too much gas and the action would cycle too violently. Too little and it wouldn't cycle at all. Garand spent years testing and refining the gas system. He conducted thousands of test firings under various conditions. He made incremental improvements to every component. Slowly, the rifle evolved into a reliable weapon. By 1928, Garand had a working prototype. The Army conducted extensive trials comparing various semi-automatic designs. Garand's rifle competed against designs from other inventors. The tests were rigorous and unforgiving. Rifles were fired thousands of times without cleaning. They were exposed to dust, mud, and water. They were frozen and baked in temperature chambers. Garand's rifle performed better than the competition, but it still wasn't perfect. The Army wanted more improvements before adopting it. Garand continued refining his design through the early 1930s. He made the rifle lighter and simpler to manufacture. He improved the reliability of the feeding mechanism. He strengthened weak points that had appeared during testing. One unique feature of Garand's design was the en-bloc clip system. Most semi-automatic rifles used detachable box magazines, but Garand chose a different approach. 8 rounds were held in a metal clip, The entire clip was inserted into the rifle from the top. After the last round was fired, the empty clip ejected automatically. It made a distinctive ping sound as it flew out. This system was simpler and more reliable than a detachable magazine. There were no magazine lips to bend or springs to weaken, but it also meant the rifle could only hold 8 rounds, and you couldn't top off a partially empty clip without ejecting it. These limitations were accepted as reasonable trade-offs. In 1936, the U.S. Army officially adopted Garand's rifle. It was designated the U.S. rifle, caliber .30 M1, but everyone simply called it the Garand. This was a historic decision. America would be the first nation to equip its entire army with a semi-automatic rifle. Other countries had experimented with semi-automatics. The Soviets had the SVT-40, the Germans had the Gewehr 43, but these were issued in limited numbers to supplement bolt-action rifles. Only America committed to making the semi-automatic the standard infantry weapon. This decision would prove crucial in the coming war. Production of the M1 Garand began at Springfield Armory in 1937. The process was slow at first. The Garand was more complex than the rifles it replaced. It had many precisely machined parts that had to fit together perfectly. Springfield Armory had to develop new manufacturing techniques. They created specialized tools and fixtures. They trained workers in the intricacies of Garand production. Initial production was only a few hundred rifles per month. As war clouds gathered in Europe, production accelerated. The Army knew it needed hundreds of thousands of Garands. Springfield Armory alone couldn't meet this demand. In 1940, Winchester Repeating Arms received a contract to produce Garands. Winchester was a major firearms manufacturer with extensive facilities. They tooled up for mass production of the M1. Other contractors were brought in to manufacture components. Barrels, stocks, and small parts came from various suppliers. This distributed production system allowed for greater output. Meanwhile, soldiers were being trained on the new rifle. Many were skeptical at first. The Garand was heavier than the Springfield it replaced. It weighed 9.5 pounds unloaded. Some soldiers complained about the extra weight. The semi-automatic mechanism also required more maintenance. Soldiers had to learn to field strip and clean the gas system, but once soldiers fired the Garand, attitudes changed. The rate of fire was impressive. A soldier could empty an 8-round clip in just seconds. Reloading was quick with practice. An experienced rifleman could fire 30 to 40 aimed shots per minute. This was triple the rate of a bolt-action rifle. In squad-level firefights, this advantage was enormous. 8 Americans with Garands could put out as much fire as 24 Germans with bolt-actions. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, America entered World War II. The Army mobilized millions of men. Every soldier needed a rifle. The demand for Garands became urgent. Production ramped up dramatically. Factories operated around the clock. Women entered the workforce to replace men who had enlisted. Rosie the Riveter assembled Garands alongside artillery shells and aircraft. By 1943, monthly production exceeded 100,000 rifles. The first American troops to see combat in World War II carried a mix of weapons. Some had Garands, others still had Springfield bolt-actions. There simply weren't enough M1s to go around yet. But as production increased, more units received Garands. By mid-1943, the M1 had become the standard rifle for most frontline troops. The first major test came in North Africa. American forces landed in Morocco and Algeria in November 1942. They faced German and Italian forces equipped with bolt-action rifles. In combat, the Garand's advantages became immediately apparent. American soldiers could lay down suppressive fire more effectively. When an enemy soldier rose to fire, Americans could shoot faster. The psychological impact was significant. German soldiers were surprised by the volume of American fire. They often believed they faced machine guns when it was just riflemen. This caused them to take cover more often. It disrupted their attacks and reduced their effectiveness. American soldiers developed tactics that exploited the Garand's capabilities. Fire and movement became more effective. One element would suppress the enemy with rapid fire. Another element would advance under this covering fire. The roles would alternate as the squad moved forward. This was harder to execute with bolt-action rifles. You needed more men to generate adequate suppressive fire. The Garand made small unit tactics more flexible and aggressive. In the Pacific theater, the M1 Garand was equally valuable. Marines and Army troops island-hopped across the Pacific. They faced Japanese soldiers armed with Arisaka bolt-action rifles. The Japanese were skilled fighters who used terrain expertly. But in firefights, the Garand gave Americans a critical edge. Japanese banzai charges met withering fire from Garands. American riflemen could fire repeatedly without working a bolt. This stopped attacks that might have overwhelmed troops with bolt actions. The jungle environment tested the Garand's reliability. Humidity, rain, and mud were constant challenges. But the M1 proved remarkably durable. With proper maintenance, it continued functioning in the worst conditions. Soldiers learned to keep their rifles clean despite the environment. The Garand's reputation for reliability grew with each campaign. In Europe, the M1 faced its toughest test on D-Day. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. American troops came ashore carrying their Garands. Many rifles were submerged in seawater during the landing. Soldiers had to quickly dry and clean their weapons under fire. Despite this rough treatment, most Garands continued to function. In the hedgerows of Normandy, the Garand proved invaluable. The dense terrain limited visibility and created many small engagements. Quick reactions and rapid fire were essential. The Garand gave American soldiers an advantage in these close-quarters battles. As Allied forces advanced across France, the M1 continued to prove itself. In the Battle of the Bulge, American troops faced a massive German counteroffensive. The fighting was brutal, with temperatures below freezing. Many weapons malfunctioned in the extreme cold. But the Garand, properly maintained, continued to operate. Soldiers wrapped their rifles in blankets between engagements. They used light oil that wouldn't freeze. These precautions kept the M1 firing when it mattered most. The rapid fire of the Garand was crucial in defensive positions. Small groups of Americans could hold off much larger German forces. The volume of fire from Garands made attackers think they faced more defenders. This psychological effect multiplied the Garand's tactical advantage. German soldiers who surrendered often commented on American firepower. They were impressed and intimidated by the M1's rate of fire. Some thought every American squad had multiple automatic weapons. They didn't realize it was mostly just Garands. The distinctive ping of the ejecting clip became legendary. There's a persistent myth that enemy soldiers listened for this sound. They would supposedly attack when they heard it, knowing the rifle was empty. In reality, this rarely, if ever, happened. The noise of battle was too loud to hear individual clip ejections, and soldiers didn't all reload at the same time. Some rifles would still be loaded and ready to fire. The myth persists, but veterans generally dismiss it. The M1 Garand wasn't without its critics. Some marksmen preferred the bolt-action Springfield for long-range accuracy. The Springfield had a slightly longer barrel and was marginally more accurate. Marine Scout snipers continued using Springfields throughout the war. The 8-round capacity also drew criticism. Soldiers sometimes wished for a larger magazine. The inability to top off a partially loaded clip was seen as a limitation. But these complaints were minor compared to the rifle's advantages. Most soldiers loved their Garands and trusted them completely. The rifle became an icon of the American soldier. Photos of GIs invariably showed them with their M1s. The Garand was as much a symbol of American power as the Sherman tank. Production of the M1 Garand continued throughout World War II. By war's end in 1945, over 4 million had been manufactured. Springfield Armory produced about 3.5 million. Winchester made about 500,000. Other contractors contributed components for millions more. This massive production effort armed an entire generation of American soldiers. After World War II, the Garand remained in service. Many soldiers brought their rifles home as souvenirs, but the military retained huge stocks of M1s. These would be needed again sooner than anyone expected. In June 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. American forces were sent to defend South Korea. They carried M1 Garands, many of which were World War II surplus. The Korean War presented new challenges for the Garand. The extreme cold of Korean winters was worse than the Battle of the Bulge. Temperatures dropped to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. Soldiers had to be careful not to touch metal parts with bare skin. Oil would freeze solid, causing weapons to malfunction. Troops learned to clean their Garands thoroughly and use minimal lubrication. Despite the harsh conditions, the M1 performed admirably. American and UN forces faced Chinese and North Korean troops. The Chinese often used human wave attacks with overwhelming numbers. The Garand's rapid fire was crucial in repelling these assaults. Small groups of Americans could hold off much larger forces. The volume of fire from Garands created walls of bullets. During the Korean War, the Garand proved its worth once again, but military technology was evolving. The Army began looking for a replacement for the M1. The new rifle would be select fire, capable of both semi and full automatic. It would use a smaller, lighter cartridge, and it would have a detachable box magazine. This would become the M14 rifle in the late 1950s. The M14 was essentially an updated Garand with these new features. It retained the gas operating system and much of the M1's reliability. But even as the M14 entered service, the Garand wasn't fully retired. National Guard and reserve units continued using M1s for years. Some even saw service in the early Vietnam War. The M1 Garand had an operational life of over 25 years. John Garand himself became a legendary figure. Despite designing one of history's most important firearms, he never became wealthy. He was a government employee and received no royalties for his invention. The Army paid him his regular salary, nothing more. After World War II, there were efforts to compensate Garand. Congress eventually awarded him $100,000 in 1944. This was a token amount compared to the value of his contribution. Garand worked at Springfield Armory until his retirement in 1953. He continued consulting on weapons development afterward. He died in 1974 at the age of 86. His legacy is the rifle that bears his name. The technical innovations of the M1 Garand were significant. The gas operating system became a standard for military rifles. Most modern assault rifles use gas operation, descended from Garand's design. The M1's reliability set a benchmark for military weapons. Future rifles had to match the Garand's durability and dependability. The concept of equipping every soldier with a semi-automatic became standard. No modern army would consider issuing bolt-action rifles as primary weapons. The Garand proved that semi-automatic operation was practical and effective. The manufacturing techniques developed for M1 production were also influential. Springfield Armory pioneered mass production of precision firearms. They created quality control systems that ensured interchangeable parts. Any M1 component would fit any M1 rifle. This made field repairs and maintenance much easier. These manufacturing principles influenced post-war firearms production worldwide. Today, the M1 Garand remains popular with collectors and shooters. The civilian marksmanship program sells surplus Garands to qualified Americans. These rifles, often 70 or 80 years old, still function perfectly. Shooting enthusiasts appreciate the M1's historical significance. They enjoy the satisfying recoil and the distinctive ping of the ejecting clip. Competitive shooters use Garands in vintage military rifle matches. The rifle is still capable of excellent accuracy. In skilled hands, it can hit targets at several hundred yards. The M1 Garand has appeared in countless films and TV shows about World War II. It's instantly recognizable to audiences worldwide. The rifle has become a symbol of American military power in the 1940s. Museums display Garands as important artifacts of military history. Veterans donated their rifles to honor their service. These weapons are tangible connections to the past. The strategic impact of the M1 Garand cannot be overstated. It gave American soldiers a significant tactical advantage in World War II. This advantage translated into lives saved and battles won. Some military historians argue the Garand shortened the war. American units could advance more aggressively because of superior firepower. They could overcome enemy positions that might have stopped troops with bolt actions. The psychological effect on enemy soldiers was significant. Facing American firepower was demoralizing. Many German and Japanese soldiers surrendered rather than face another assault. The Garand contributed to breaking enemy morale. The rifle also influenced enemy weapons development. Germany accelerated production of the STG-44 assault rifle. They needed a weapon that could match American firepower. The Soviets also prioritized semi-automatic and automatic rifles. The M1 Garand started an arms race in infantry weapons. The Cold War saw all major powers adopt semi-automatic or automatic rifles. The age of the bolt action as a primary infantry weapon was over. The Garand had proven that a new standard was possible and necessary. For the individual soldier, the M1 Garand was a trusted companion. Many veterans speak of their Garands with affection. The rifle never let them down when they needed it most. It was heavy, yes, but that weight was reassuring. It felt solid and well made. The walnut stock was beautifully finished. The mechanical action was smooth and precise. Soldiers took pride in maintaining their M1s. Cleaning the rifle was a ritual that gave them control in chaos. A clean, well-oiled Garand was a comfort in dangerous situations. Many soldiers personalized their rifles. They carved initials or unit insignia into the stock. They gave their rifles nicknames. The M1 became more than just a weapon. It was part of their identity. The training with the Garand was thorough and standardized. Every soldier learned the same manual of arms. They could field strip the rifle blindfolded. They practiced reloading until it became second nature. This training saved lives in combat. When things happened fast, muscle memory took over. Soldiers didn't have to think about operating their rifles. They could focus on tactics and survival. The reliability of the Garand was legendary among troops. Stories circulated about M1s that had fired thousands of rounds without cleaning, about rifles that had been submerged in water and still worked, about Garands that had been run over by tanks and kept firing. Some of these stories were exaggerations, but they reflected the deep trust soldiers had in their weapons. The M1 Garand very rarely let them down. When properly maintained, it was extraordinarily reliable. The simplicity of the design contributed to this reliability. While more complex than a bolt action, the Garand wasn't overly complicated. It had fewer parts than many competing designs. Each part was robustly made from quality materials. The tolerances were generous enough to handle dirt and debris, but tight enough to maintain accuracy. This balance was John Garand's genius. He created a design that was both precise and forgiving. The comparison between the M1 Garand and enemy rifles is stark. The German Mauser 98K was an excellent bolt-action rifle. It was accurate, reliable, and well-made. But it could only fire as fast as the operator could work the bolt. In a direct firefight, a soldier with a Garand had a huge advantage. The Japanese Arisaka Type 99 was similarly outclassed. It was a strong, simple bolt action, but Japanese soldiers using it were at a severe disadvantage against Americans. The fire rate differential was decisive. Germany did field the Gewehr 43 semi-automatic rifle, but it was issued in limited numbers and never replaced the bolt action as standard. Most German infantrymen fought the entire war with Mausers. The Soviets had the SVT-40 semi-automatic. It was reasonably effective, but suffered reliability problems. Soviet production emphasized simplicity, and the bolt action Mosin Nagant remained common. Only America fully committed to equipping all infantry with semi-automatics. This decision gave American soldiers a consistent advantage. They weren't depending on getting issued one of a limited number of semi-autos. Every American rifleman had the same superior weapon. This uniformity also simplified training and logistics. The ammunition requirements for the M1 Garand were substantial. The 30-06 cartridge was powerful but heavy. Each round weighed about 26 grams. Soldiers typically carried 80 rounds in 10 8-round clips. This was over 4 pounds of ammunition alone. Add the 9-pound rifle, and soldiers were carrying significant weight. But the firepower was worth it. The 30-06 had excellent range and stopping power. It was effective out to 500 yards or more. This gave American soldiers confidence in their weapons at all ranges. The production of ammunition for the Garand was a massive undertaking. Billions of rounds were manufactured during World War II. American industry rose to the challenge. Factories operated continuously producing cartridges. The logistical system delivered ammunition to soldiers worldwide. This was as important as producing the rifles themselves. A Garand without ammunition was useless. The accessories for the M1 Garand were relatively simple. The bayonet was a 10-inch blade that mounted to the muzzle. It was rarely used in actual bayonet charges, but it was useful as a tool and psychological deterrent. The rifle grenade launcher was another attachment. It allowed the Garand to launch grenades up to 200 yards. This gave infantrymen indirect fire capability. Slings allowed soldiers to carry the rifle on their shoulder. They could also be used as shooting aids for improved accuracy. Cleaning kits were issued to maintain the rifle in the field. These contained brushes, patches, and oil. Regular cleaning was essential to keep the Garand functioning properly. Variants of the M1 Garand were developed for specialized roles. The M1C and M1D were sniper versions with telescopic sights. These saw limited use as many snipers preferred bolt-action rifles. The T-26 was an experimental selective fire version. It could fire in both semi and full automatic modes, but it was never adopted for production. The lessons from this experiment influenced the later M14 design. The legacy of the M1 Garand in American military culture is profound. It armed the generation that won World War II. Veterans remember the Garand with respect and nostalgia. It was the weapon they carried through the most significant experience of their lives. The rifle represents American industrial might, the ability to equip millions of soldiers with a superior weapon. It symbolizes American innovation. A Canadian immigrant working for the US government created this masterpiece. The M1 Garand also represents a turning point in military technology. It bridged the gap between traditional rifles and modern assault weapons. The principles proven by the Garand guided all future rifle development. Every semi-automatic and automatic rifle owes something to the M1. For firearms enthusiasts, the Garand is a beloved classic. Its elegant design and historical significance make it highly collectible. Shooting a Garand is a tangible connection to history. You hold the same type of rifle that stormed Normandy Beach. You hear the same ping that American GIs heard. This experiential connection makes the Garand special. The M1 Garand's place in military history is secure. It was the right weapon at the right time. It gave American soldiers a decisive advantage when they needed it most. General Patton's assessment was correct. The M1 Garand was truly the greatest battle implement of its era. Not because it was perfect, but because it was effective. It was reliable when reliability mattered most. It was powerful enough to stop any enemy, and it was fast enough to give American soldiers an edge. That edge saved countless lives. It helped win battles and ultimately win wars. The simple ability to fire twice as fast as the enemy was revolutionary. It changed the calculus of infantry combat. American soldiers could be more aggressive because they had superior firepower. They could take risks that would be foolish with bolt-action rifles. This aggressiveness was part of American tactical doctrine. The Garand made that doctrine possible. Looking at the M1 Garand today, it seems almost quaint. Modern assault rifles are lighter, hold more ammunition, and have selective fire. They have optics, lasers, and tactical accessories. The Garand is a relic of a simpler time, but in its context it was revolutionary. It represented a quantum leap in infantry firepower. The soldiers who carried it knew they had an advantage. That psychological confidence was as valuable as the tactical advantage. Soldiers trusted their weapons and therefore trusted themselves. The story of the M1 Garand is ultimately a story of American pragmatism. The military identified a need for better firepower. They found a talented designer and gave him resources and time. Garand created a practical solution that worked. Industry scaled up production to equip millions of soldiers. The system worked because everyone did their part. Garand designed, factories built, soldiers fought. The result was victory. The M1 Garand gave US troops a massive fire rate advantage. While enemies worked bolts between shots, Americans fired as fast as they could pull the trigger. This simple difference had profound consequences. It shifted the balance of power in countless firefights. It saved American lives and took enemy lives. It helped achieve victory in the most destructive war in human history. America's first semi-automatic service rifle was a war winner. The M1 Garand earned its reputation through performance under the worst conditions, from the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of the Pacific, from the frozen hills of Korea to the deserts of North Africa. Everywhere American soldiers fought, the Garand was there. Everywhere American soldiers fought, the Garand was there. Reliable, powerful, and fast. The training that soldiers received with the M1 created a standardized system. Every American rifleman knew the weapon intimately. They could operate it by feel in complete darkness. They knew the sound of a properly functioning Garand. Any deviation meant something needed attention. This level of familiarity bred confidence. Soldiers didn't worry about their rifles failing them. They focused on the mission and the enemy. The Garand allowed them to concentrate on fighting rather than weapons maintenance. The psychological impact on enemy forces deserves emphasis. When you're being shot at by multiple Garands, It sounds like machine gun fire. The continuous crack of rifles firing without pause was intimidating. German and Japanese soldiers often overestimated American numbers. They thought they faced larger forces than actually opposed them. This perception affected their tactical decisions. They were more cautious, more defensive. This gave Americans the initiative in engagements. The maintenance procedures for the Garand were straightforward. Field stripping could be done in under a minute. Remove the trigger group, operating rod and bolt. Clean the barrel, chamber and gas system. Apply a light coat of oil to moving parts. Reassemble and function check. This simple routine kept the rifle operating reliably. Soldiers performed it regularly, often daily in combat. The ritual of cleaning became meditative for many. It was a moment of calm in chaos, a chance to care for the weapon that kept them alive. The accuracy of the M1 Garand was excellent for a service rifle. Military specifications called for 5-inch groups at 200 yards. Well-maintained rifles often exceeded this standard. The sights were simple but effective. A front blade and rear aperture provided a clear sight picture. Adjustments for windage and elevation were possible. Most soldiers zeroed their rifles and left them alone. The Garand was accurate enough for combat without constant adjustment. Marksmanship training emphasized practical shooting positions, prone, kneeling, sitting, and standing. Soldiers learned to shoot quickly from each position. The Garand's weight helped steady the rifle during firing. The recoil was manageable, allowing rapid follow-up shots. The comparison with post-war rifles is interesting. The M14 that replaced the Garand was essentially an improved M1. It retained the gas system and similar ergonomics, but it added selective fire and a 20-round magazine. Many soldiers who used both preferred the M1's simplicity. The M14 on full auto was difficult to control. The lighter 7.62 NATO cartridge had less stopping power than 30-06. Some felt the Garand was actually better for its intended role. The M16 that eventually replaced the M14 was radically different. Lightweight, using a small caliber cartridge fully automatic capable, it represented a different philosophy of infantry combat. Volume of fire over individual shot power. The Garand belonged to the older tradition of powerful, accurate rifles. Each shot was meant to count. Soldiers were trained to aim and fire deliberately. The semi-automatic action just let them do it faster. The cultural impact of the M1 Garand extends beyond the military. It appears in countless World War II films and television shows. The image of an American GI with his Garand is iconic. It represents the American soldier of the 1940s and 50s. Video games frequently feature the M1 Garand. Players appreciate its power and distinctive sound. The ping of the ejecting clip is always included. It's one of the most recognizable weapon sounds in gaming. Reenactors and living history groups use authentic Garands. They demonstrate the rifle's operation to public audiences. This keeps the history alive for new generations. Young people can see and hear the rifle that armed their grandparents. The preservation of Garands is important to many veterans and historians. Organizations work to maintain stocks of these rifles. They restore them to proper condition. They ensure that future generations can appreciate this piece of history. Some countries that received Garands through military aid still have them. Greece, Turkey, and South Korea received American M1s. Some of these rifles remained in service into the 1970s. Today, they're mostly relegated to ceremonial roles, but they represent America's support during the Cold War. The technical specifications of the M1 Garand are worth noting. Weight, 9.5 pounds empty, 11.6 pounds loaded. Length, 43.6 inches overall. Barrel length, 24 inches. Muzzle velocity, 2,800 feet per second. Effective range, 500 yards. Maximum range, 3,500 yards. Rate of fire, 40 to 50 rounds per minute aimed fire. Feed system, 8-round en-bloc clip. These specifications made the Garand superior to any bolt-action rifle. The combination of power, range, and rate of fire was unmatched. Allied soldiers who used other rifles often envied Americans their Garands. British troops with Lee Enfields wished for the semi-automatic capability. Soviet soldiers with Mosin Nagants would have preferred M1s. Only Americans had Garands in sufficient numbers to equip entire divisions. This was a unique advantage that affected the course of the war. The cost of producing an M1 Garand was reasonable. In 1945, the unit cost was approximately $85. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $1,300 today. For such a complex and capable weapon, this was economical. Mass production techniques kept costs down. The investment in tooling and training paid off. America could afford to equip millions of soldiers with Garands. This industrial capability was as important as the rifle's design. The best weapon is useless if you can't produce enough of them. The M1 Garand was both excellent and abundant. This combination made it truly revolutionary. Looking at the M1 Garand's service life, it's impressive. From adoption in 1936 to retirement from frontline service in the early 1960s, a quarter century of military use. It served in World War II, Korea, and early Vietnam. Few weapon systems remain effective for so long. This longevity speaks to the soundness of Garand's design. He created something that worked and kept working. Improvements were incremental rather than fundamental. The basic design required no major changes. As we conclude the story of the M1 Garand, several themes stand out. First, the importance of firepower in infantry combat. The ability to shoot faster gave Americans a decisive advantage. Second, the value of reliability under harsh conditions. The Garand worked when and where it mattered most. Third, the significance of equipping all soldiers with the same superior weapon. Uniformity created tactical flexibility. Fourth, the power of American industrial production. Making millions of complex rifles quickly was a feat in itself. And finally, the lasting impact of good design. John Garand's creation influenced generations of firearms. His gas operating system became the standard. His attention to reliability set the benchmark. The M1 Garand gave U.S. troops a massive fire rate advantage. While enemies worked bolts, Americans fired freely. This simple difference multiplied American combat effectiveness. It saved lives, won battles, and helped secure victory. General Patton was right to call it the greatest battle implement ever devised. At least for its time, the M1 Garand deserved that accolade. It was America's first semi-automatic service rifle, and it changed warfare forever. The legacy of the M1 Garand endures in every modern military rifle. The principle it established remains valid. Infantry soldiers need reliable, powerful weapons that fire rapidly. The M1 Garand proved this concept in the crucible of combat. And the American soldiers who carried it into battle are its true testament. They trusted the Garand with their lives, and the Garand rarely let them down. This is the story of America's first semi-automatic service rifle, the weapon that gave U.S. troops a decisive advantage. The M1 Garand, the greatest battle implement of its era.